What's going on, guys? Back at you guys with another presentation, guys. Happy Tuesday. In this presentation here, guys, we're going to talk about brothers who end up, you know, marrying other ethnicities. A lot of people have a stigma against brothers who marry other ethnicities, right? A lot of brothers, when they marry out, people say they got self-hate. People say they're bitter. People say a lot of things. But you know what? A lot of brothers who end up marrying outside of their race, this is what I got to tell you guys. A lot of those brothers is not necessarily because they got self-hate, because there's some brothers that I've heard say that they married outside of their race because they couldn't get a sister. For some unforeseen reason, they just couldn't get a sister. There are some brothers that, sisters just ain't attracted to them, and sisters ain't giving them a chance. And, especially, in the urban community, when you don't fit the narrative, as a brother, like I always say, as a urban man, you got to be on that gangster stuff. You got to be on that head buster stuff. So I just want to, say, a lot of brothers who, end up marrying outside of their race, a lot of times they get a lot of shade thrown at them. But I just want to shine a light on this situation and say that if a brother marries outside of his, ethnicity, it's not necessarily because he got self-hate. It's not necessarily because he's ashamed of who he is. It's just the fact that, some brothers, they just didn't appeal to sisters, because there's some brothers that I've heard say that they love their own, their own women, their own race of women, but for some unforeseen reason, they couldn't get a sister. So, don't think that just because a brother, marries outside, of his ethnicity, that he got self-hatred, or that he's ashamed of himself, because that's not the case. A lot of these brothers, they've been shunned, in the urban community, as a brother, if you're not stereotypical, that can get you wrote off. So I just want people to understand that, just because a brother may marry outside of his ethnicity, it doesn't mean that he's not in love with his own people. Because I'm here to tell you for the record, it's something about a sister that sets my soul on fire. There's some beautiful sisters out there. I've always loved sisters that was around my complexion, brown skin, nice lips. It's some good looking sisters out there, some beautiful sisters out there. So, that's not the case that, brothers, who marry outside of their ethnicity, that they were ashamed of themselves. It's just that, and this goes beyond, ethnicity. Like I always say, some guys just not being chosen, regardless of what ethnicity you are as a man. George Sedini was a white guy. He wasn't chosen. So, this stuff goes beyond your ethnicity. Some men just not chosen, plain and simple. But I notice a lot of brothers get shade for, marrying outside of their culture. And don't think that a brother's bitter or that he got something against his own kind. There may be some brothers that may have been burned and they may have something against their own people. But that's not the case for all urban brothers or urban men. I'm going to just say that. That's not the case for all urban men, who marry outside of their ethnicity, that, they're ashamed of themselves, or that, they don't love their own race of women. That's not the issue all the time. It's just that some brothers not being chosen. And it is what it is. But, because it's always funny how a lot of brothers who ended up marrying women of other ethnicities, they always get a lot of backlash. They always get bashed. They always get told that, they dealing with some hate issues, and that's not the, they dealing with some self-hating issues, and that's not the case. That's not always the case. That may be the case for some brothers, but that's not the case for all brothers. So I just want to say, for the record, there are a lot of brothers who love sisters. A lot of brothers who, find black women to be very attractive. I've seen some gorgeous sisters in my life. Sisters, they the main ones who make you beat the drum. So, it's not that these brothers have any hating issues. That's not the case with a lot of these brothers. It's just that things just don't work out for some brothers. And I feel people should just be more open-minded and understanding. There are some brothers, it just didn't work out for them. I feel, there are some brothers that, sisters found them to be unattractive. Sisters probably found them to be too corny. They wasn't gangster enough. They wasn't head buster enough. I'm not saying that you got to be a head buster, but you get where I'm coming from. As a brother, you get more respect if you from the hood and if you fit that narrative. But there are brothers who are not thugged out at all, who have beautiful sisters for wives. So I'm not saying you have to be that way, but you just get more respect when you're on that side. But hopefully this video, this presentation, shined a light on, this issue, to just let it be known that just because a brother marries outside of his ethnicity, it doesn't mean that he's not in love with his own kind. People just got to learn to look at things from that perspective. Perhaps he couldn't get his own kind. It's all perspective in how you look at things. So I just feel people should look at things from a different perspective. Just look at things from a different angle. Don't always assume that if a brother is marrying another ethnicity of woman that he's ashamed of himself, or that he's against his own people, because that's not always the case. It's just that things don't work out for some people, and I'm gonna leave it at that. and for certain guys, regardless of ethnicity, things don't work out for them. Things just didn't look up for them. They just wasn't chosen. So you guys let me know what you think about this. How do you guys feel about this situation, about brothers who end up marrying outside of their ethnicity? Because in all cases, it's not because they're against their own people. It's just that they just wasn't chosen. Because it's a lot of brothers that get a lot of backlash. And it's a lot of brothers who've gotten bashed for marrying women of other ethnicities. So I just felt that this presentation would be a good topic, and this would be a good topic to shine a light on, because a lot of people don't want to admit this. A lot of people say, there's someone for everybody. Well, how come some men not being chosen out here? Ladies, comment on this presentation. That's what I want. I want some women to start commenting on these presentations. But I know a lot of women don't watch this kind of content. But you guys have a great day. Happy Tuesday. Talk to you soon.